I believe it's been obvious pretty much from the very beginning of the Russiagate hoax, the Russiagate fraud, which I'll remind you again was driven by the core conspiracy claim that the Trump campaign officials collaborated and colluded and conspired with the Kremlin to hack into the DNC email server as well as John Podesta's email and disseminate those emails to WikiLeaks, and by the broader conspiracy theory that Trump was being blackmailed by Vladimir Putin with sexual material, compromising financial information, personal blackmail as well, and that therefore the Kremlin was basically, once Trump got elected, running the country. It was a completely unhinged and deranged conspiracy theory from the start, for which there was no evidence. I'm not just saying that retroactively. Like some people, not very many, but some, I was saying it quite vocally at the time. And it was clear not just that this was a scam or a fraud, but that it was one deliberately cooked up from the bowels of the intelligence community and law enforcement agencies, where so many of these lies get disseminated, namely from the CIA, then led by John Brennan, who we now know is a vehement, devoted hater of Donald Trump, as well as Jim Comey at the FBI, same thing, as well as James Clapper, who was the Director of National Intelligence under Obama. This was all done under the Obama administration, and they were trying to help what had been their colleague inside the Obama administration, Hillary Clinton, who served as Secretary of State, and obviously was at the center of Democratic Party politics. The idea was to do what they could, using their power of the CIA and the FBI, to anoint her as president, and more importantly, their eyes, to prevent Donald Trump from ascending to the presidency. And when Robert Mueller closed his investigation, didn't arrest anybody for that core conspiracy, produced his report saying, despite looking for 18 months with unlimited resources, the dream team of prosecutors, unlimited subpoena power, he could not find the evidence to establish that conspiracy theory between Trump and the Russians. And of course, nobody got prosecuted for it as well. Any rational person at that moment would have said, wow, this whole thing was a hoax. And a lot of people did say that. The problem is that, as usual, none of the people responsible for this hoax, that was not just, again, disseminated because they aired or because they were victim of groupthink. It was deliberately manipulated intelligence, deliberate lies spread to their favorite media servants in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and NBC News, who they knew would go forth and mindlessly spread it, despite it all being anonymous and without evidence. And none of these people, despite being exposed as the perpetrators of a pretty serious fraudulent attempt to manipulate the electorate, have ever faced accountability. And it's possible this might be changing, largely as a result of what Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard did a couple of weeks ago when she announced she was declassifying and releasing to the public a huge batch of previously unseen documents detailing what exactly was done inside the CIA, inside the FBI, inside the Obama White House to manufacture this intelligence and fabricate this scam. And while there are people who would say that they knew that that was likely true, and I'm certainly one of them, having more evidence, more proof of exactly how they did it, of exactly what they did, showing not only that they knew it was false at the time they were saying it, but that they lied to Congress and therefore the American people about it, which is itself a crime. The question is, why don't they deserve legal accountability, criminal accountability for having done that? And it's not just that Tulsi Gabbard released these documents. She also, on the basis of those documents, made a criminal referral about several high-ranking Obama officials, including John Brennan and James Clapper, to the Justice Department, which is not that meaningful. Anyone can make a criminal referral to the Justice Department. Obviously, if a cabinet secretary does it, it's going to get higher attention and priority. But it doesn't mean anything. It's just asking the Justice Department to take a look and determine whether there was criminality, whether there were crimes committed in this matter. And oftentimes what the Trump Justice Department has been doing is they make these very melodramatic announcements, often to distract their supporters from something they're unhappy with or to give them red meat, where they say, oh, the DOJ is opening an investigation into this person or into this matter. And you look at it and it's like, who cares if you open an investigation? So many investigations that are quote unquote open never go anywhere. You can open an investigation, not do anything with it. It's a completely meaningless announcement, which is why it's typically not announced by the Justice Department. But a lot of these are very politicized investigations that are being opened, so it's a way of telling Trump supporters, I know you're disappointed in a lot of things, like with Epstein and the war in Iran and the war in Israel and the war in Ukraine and all these other promises that we made that we haven't kept. So here's some red meat. But in this case, it goes far beyond that. Here's Fox News reporting yesterday, exclusive, the Justice Department is launching a grand jury investigation into Russiagate conspiracy allegations, sources say. Quote, Attorney General Pam Bondi directed her staff Monday to act on the criminal referral from Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard related to the alleged conspiracy of the President Donald Trump to Russia. And the Department of Justice is now opening a grand jury investigation into the matter, Fox News Digital has learned. Bondi personally ordered an unnamed federal prosecutor to initiate legal proceedings, and the prosecutor is expected to present department evidence to a grand jury, which will allow the department to secure a potential indictment, according to a letter from Bondi reviewed by Fox News Digital and a source familiar with the investigation. A DOJ spokesperson declined to comment on the report of an investigation, but said Bondi is taking the referral from Gabbard, quote, very seriously. The spokesman said Bondi believed there is, quote, clear cause for deep concern and a need for next steps. Now, the reason I say it's a serious matter to initiate a grand jury investigation, even if it doesn't lead to indictments, it's a real step. It's not like announcing an investigation that's meaningless. You don't initiate a grand jury investigation unless you're serious. It requires, you have to go to court. You have to convince the court that there's sufficient grounds for impaneling a grand jury. Oftentimes it takes huge amounts of time of the citizens who serve on the grand jury. It could take months of their time. It takes a lot of resources from the Justice Department to conduct an investigation using a grand jury. But that is what you would do if you're serious about indictments. We don't know exactly who the targets of this grand jury investigation is, or which prosecutors are overseeing the investigation, but we do know, at least based on this Fox News report, and obviously Fox News have a lot of contacts inside the Justice Department and the Trump administration more broadly, a grand jury panel has been assembled to oversee the investigation into these potential crimes that were committed in 2016. We had Aaron Mate host our show, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, July 23rd, actually. And he had on John Solomon, who's a long-time journalist and columnist who works for The Hill. And they discussed the possibility of a grand jury investigation. And here's what they said. This was 2 weeks ago.
Here, what are you expecting to happen in the coming months? More document releases? Do you think that? I mean, and who do you think they're looking at when it comes to building a criminal case?
Well, listen, you got to have the apparatus to do it. It's one thing for the FBI to open the case and gather the evidence that's currently available, but for the evidence that hasn't been produced and needs to be forcibly produced, you need grand jury power. You need grand jury subpoenas. If this was, conspiracies are typically applied to drug cartels and mob cases and things like that. If this is treated like every other case, the next step is to create a strike force and then give that strike force the ability to use a grand jury. Maybe you name a special counsel because Donald Trump is the alleged victim for some of this, so you create some independence. Whether they do that or not, if they don't create the strike force, they're not following the normal procedures that a Justice Department would use for a conspiracy case like this. So we have to look. The ball is in Pam Bondi's court. The question is she going to shoot the three-point shot or not? I don't know the answer to that yet, but I will tell you the way the Justice Department normally would work, a strike force would be the very next part of the process that you would see unfold in the next week or two.
You'll know this is serious if they convene a grand jury, if they impanel a grand jury. Because that is when the Justice Department has massive investigative power, very invasive investigative power. You can force people to go testify before the grand jury. It's not optional. You can get all their documents, their phone records, an enormous scope of evidence. So they were anticipating this grand jury investigation, or at least saying, well, no, Pam Bondi is serious if that's what she does, and now she's done it. It doesn't mean they're going to try and indict Obama officials, but that is actually the first step, and it's a very real, concrete step, not a illusory step like sometimes Justice Department under Trump does. Here, Stephen Miller talked to the White House, the Trump White House. We're going to get back to that in just a second. But here's a article by Miranda Devine, who is another journalist who was very skeptical of the Russiagate story from the very start. And she wrote on August 3rd in the New York Post an article with this headline: Russiagate lies are being exposed and everybody is watching, even the Democrats. Quote, despite the best efforts of Russiagate complicit media to dismiss as, quote, Russian disinformation, the latest revelations in escalating scandal implicating President Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton in the treasonous, quote, years-long coup against President Trump, the public is paying attention and wants heads to roll. According to a Rasmussen poll released Monday, nearly two-thirds of voters, 65%, are following declassified releases over the past month by DNI Tulsi Gabbard and Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, quote, very closely, 32%, or somewhat closely, 33%. Repudiating the calculated media silence about the Obama administration's fake narratives and manipulation of intelligence to frame Trump as a Kremlin stooge to cover up Clinton's wrongdoing. The poll shows 54% believe Obama administration officials committed serious crimes in, quote, manipulating intelligence, with 37% saying it's, quote, very likely and 17% saying somewhat likely. A staggering 69% agree it is critical that the perpetrators be held accountable, quote, for the survival of our country. This is not about looking in the rearview mirror or pursuing petty vendettas, as Trump critics say. It is about holding the coup plotters accountable as a deterrent, restoring the integrity of our intelligence and law enforcement institutions, and righting a historic wrong committed against the American people. Now, that frames this debate extremely well, because so often in American politics, this ethos emerges among mainstream media outlets, among mainstream journalists, among the Washington political class in both parties, that when it comes to political elites, we have to let bygones be bygones. When it comes to financial elites, we have to let bygones be bygones. It's too disruptive, it's too inappropriate, it's too distracting to go and prosecute Wall Street barons just because they caused a global economic meltdown. They're too important for our economy. We can't be suing Wall Street tycoons and investment banks. These are not the people who belong in a criminal court. And the same thing happens every time there are political elites who seem to have engaged in potential criminality, and all of Washington unites to say, we're not a country that prosecutes our political elites and former government officials. That's only what banana republics do. And I think it's a very real question. Is a country more of a banana republic if they announce or basically effectively decide that high-level political elites and high-level financial elites are going to be immunized from crimes on the grounds that looking backward is too disruptive, we only have to look forward? I mean, looking backward is what's required for prosecution of every crime. Or is it more of a banana republic to hold people accountable in high levels of government when they commit crimes? I would argue the latter. Obviously, you don't want an endless array of lawfare and abuse of the legal process to imprison people, and it's so, of course, ironic, probably should go without saying, that the very people now who are expressing such indignation, like how dare the Trump administration even talk about prosecuting former government officials and the other party. This is the stuff of banana republics. All of these same people were so devoted to prosecuting Donald Trump once he left the White House and trying to imprison him so he couldn't run again in 2024. They first tried to get him kicked off the ballot. When that didn't work, they brought felony prosecutions in 4 different jurisdictions, 2 in state courts, 1 in Atlanta, 1 in Manhattan, and then 2 federal prosecutions, 1 in Miami, 1 in Washington. So to watch these people say, oh, it's a threat to our democracy to prosecute high-level political officials, it's the kind of thing banana republics do, it's enough to make you want to vomit, like you choke on their insincerity and hypocrisy. But I was never opposed to prosecuting Trump because I believe that former presidents should be immune. I was opposed to prosecuting President Trump because I didn't think that any of those 4 cases had any legal validity of any kind. Lots of people who believe that will say, oh, I think the classified documents case in South Florida, the one that alleged that he took classified documents, without authorization to his Mar-a-Lago home and then refused to turn them over, that was the strongest case. I just am so unsympathetic to this idea that of all people, a president who is the sole and exclusive arbiter of what is and isn't classified, he can just literally wave his hand and say, this is hereby declassified. Or he can wave his hand and say, this is classified. The idea that a person with that power over classification designations can somehow commit a crime by taking with him documents that he obviously thinks are safe for him to take when he has the absolute power to declassify them is preposterous, on top of which every day, literally, there are official leaks, official disclosures of classified information. All of Russiagate was that, whispering classified information to the Washington Post and the New York Times. That's how the Iraq War was sold. Oh, we have top secret intelligence that shows Iraq is getting weapons of mass destruction. This is the stuff that drives Washington every day. No one ever gets prosecuted for it unless you're like a low-level leaker that's not trying to advance official narratives the way most leaks are done in Washington with their media servant. But like Edward Snowden or Daniel Ellsberg or Chelsea Manning or Thomas Drake or William Binney, who leak not to serve the government's agenda but to expose their wrongdoing. Those are the only people who ever get prosecuted for mishandling or taking with them unauthorized, in another unauthorized way classified documents. The idea that a president would be guilty of that is preposterous. The case in Manhattan we've gone over many times, just like an accounting error that they turned into a felony to cover up payments to a porn star that Trump had an affair with. It's like, who cares? And then the claim that he somehow incited an attempted coup on January 6th because of a speech that he gave, which was not only filled with at least one major sentence was telling them to go to the Capitol and march peacefully. But even if he had said, I think it's justified to be very aggressive at the Capitol, that would still be protected speech. You can't be held responsible for the acts of people who hear your speech under the First Amendment. So none of those cases have any merit. But if they had merit, I would have absolutely been in favor of prosecuting Trump. I don't think high government officials like John Brennan or James Clapper or Hillary Clinton or John Brennan deserve immunity. Why would they deserve immunity? I didn't believe after the 2008 financial crisis that Wall Street barons deserved immunity. I didn't believe after the Trump administration, after the Bush-Cheney administration, that people who spied on American citizens without the warrants required by law because Bush and Cheney ordered them to do so at the NSA, or people who engaged in torture, setting up torture black sites all over the world, and it wasn't just waterboarding, it was all sorts of other sleep deprivation and stress positions and manipulation of diet to break people that people get prosecuted for all the time. I didn't think that deserved immunity either. And yet, that's when I first began accounting this argument, was back in 2008. Barack Obama was repeatedly asked during the campaign, which he won against John McCain, if you get into office, would you consider having your Justice Department and your Attorney General investigate whether or not people at the CIA, whether or not George Bush and Dick Cheney, whether or not people at the NSA committed crimes by spying on Americans without the warrants required by law, by implementing torture regimes, which are crimes under American law that people are prosecuted for? And Obama always said, yes, absolutely, when he was running. He's like, I would absolutely let my Justice Department, instruct my Justice Department to investigate whether there were crimes and whether folks should be held accountable. He said, nobody's above the law. Why would they get immunity? And Obama wins, he gets into office, and within 2 weeks, Rahm Emanuel is going on Sunday shows saying, don't even ask me about prosecutions. Those aren't happening. We're not intending to prosecute anybody for past crimes. I mean, we're intending to prosecute huge numbers of ordinary American citizens. Obviously, we're going to look back and put them in prison, but not anyone in the Bush administration. But perish the thought. And then in March of 2009, just 2 months after he was inaugurated, President Obama announced, I'm immunizing basically everybody at the CIA, at the Bush administration, no prosecutions of any kind, and none were ever permitted, despite him promising to do so. And the debate at the time, basically everyone in the media, everyone in the corporate media, which at the time in 2008 was the only game in town. There wasn't really thriving independent media. There were blogs, but nothing like what we have today. They actually mattered back then. And it was essentially a universal consensus. Before Obama announced it, they were urging him, don't do prosecutions. We're not a banana republic. We don't prosecute past crimes by high-level officials. And that was the ethos in Washington, that there's full-scale immunity. And it drove me mad. I couldn't even understand the argument. Like, why would we have a moray that just because someone is a high-level, powerful government official, they should be immune from prosecution? Every American is subject to prosecution. We imprison more people on a raw basis, raw numbers, and as a proportion of our population than any country on the planet. It's not like we have a very lenient criminal justice policy. We imprison millions and millions of Americans for nonviolent drug offenses, for all sorts of things. And then at the same time, while we're imprisoning ordinary Americans en masse, we're going to immunize high-level government officials. And remember, it was also Obama who basically said, we're not prosecuting any Wall Street firms or any Wall Street tycoons that caused the meltdown, the economic and financial crisis, by engaging in massive fraud with derivatives and other instruments that Warren Buffett had been warning about for years, that Ron Paul had been saying were all just scams and invisible imaginary money, that it was all going to come crashing down. Everyone knew that it was. And they just pulled as much money out of this fake system as they could, got extremely rich, and it caused a financial collapse. And Obama had people like Tim Geithner as Secretary of the Treasury, who was extremely loyal to Wall Street. That's why he was chosen. He had been the chair of the New York Fed Bank. He was incredibly loyal to and integrated in Wall Street. Same with Larry Summers and all the people that, first as Treasury Secretary under the Bush administration, who architected the bailout of Wall Street, which was Hank Paulson, who came from Goldman Sachs. And then all the Obama financial advisors did as well. And so not only did Obama say, we're not going to prosecute anyone on Wall Street, we rely on them, they're too important to get our economy rolling, we can't be prosecuting them. He also bailed them out. Both parties got together and bailed out the criminals that caused the financial collapse. They gave them billions and billions in taxpayer money. Remember, the argument was they're too big to fail. They're just too powerful. We can't let them fail. They can't have any consequences for their improprieties. They're too important. They're too big. And then Obama had this gigantic fund that Congress gave him to save the middle class families who couldn't keep up with their mortgages because of all the meltdown in the economic system. And he let millions of Americans, ordinary Americans, just have their homes foreclosed. And so you constantly see this two-tiered justice system. I actually wrote a book in 2011. After I had seen this for so long, there you see the title on the screen. I'm just showing this to show how long I've been writing about this, which is called With Liberty and Justice for Some, How the Law is Used to Destroy Equality and Protect the Powerful. And it was basically just about, we've had this ethos for so long in Washington. It actually goes back to Gerald Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon. If you go and watch the speech Gerald Ford gave to justify his pardon of Richard Nixon, which at the time among Americans was extremely controversial. Like, why should the President of the United States be pardoned when many of his underlings went to prison and Americans go to prison all the time? Why is the president getting this free pass? But among Washington media, it was basically unanimous that we shouldn't prosecute Nixon. And the speech that Gerald Ford gave, he basically said, look, it's more important to look forward and to deal with the problems that we face than it is to look backwards. Prosecuting high-level political officials is too disruptive. It's too distracting. We have to make sure we're looking to the future, not the past. And that became the prevailing ethos in Washington with regard to every form of criminality among top-level financial and government elites. There are exceptions. If someone, member of Congress, takes massive bribes in a very sloppy way and they get caught, they'll be prosecuted. If someone on Wall Street just commits blatant massive fraud, they might get prosecuted. It's very rare. It has to be like an aberration. Usually they have to victimize powerful people or very wealthy people. And like the reason Bernie Madoff was so hated was because he stole from essentially quite wealthy people. But if you're just a government official and you don't really have important and powerful and wealthy victims, or the victims are just the United States, you get immunized. And it's just been this effective ethos. And that was why when the Supreme Court decision came out granting immunity, full-scale immunity to Trump for all acts he undertook in his office, everyone was so shocked, like, this is an attack on our democracy. How can immunity is so antithetical to the United States? I didn't necessarily disagree that immunity is antithetical to how the United States is supposed to function, but it wasn't some new radical invention that the conservative Supreme Court created as a gift to Trump. Aside from the fact that, as I pointed out at the time, the immunity goes to all other presidents as well. Before Trump, past presidents like Joe Biden and Barack Obama, as well as future presidents as well. It's not some gift to Trump, but also it wasn't some radical break or departure from how America works. It was basically just a codification of this immunity that we all decided effectively American political elites and financial elites should enjoy, but only them. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.